begin at the beginning.
Do you want me to look at you or look at the camera?
Whatever strikes
No,
you.
whatever you like. I mean,
We just try to make it like a conversation.
yeah, well, that's
so,
better.
yeah,
Of course, that's a better way. I just wanted to check. Yeah.
This is the live stream here.
Yeah, that's the live stream, so that's what people will be watching on the internet.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So why Berkeley, I guess is the question. How did you get attracted to the subject?
Well, I've been doing a series, as you know, on institutions. I
yes.
hadn't done a university. I wanted to do a university, and I wanted to do a public university. Berkeley is the greatest public university in the world, so I simply wrote a letter to the chancellor, whom I had never met, asking whether he would consider the idea, and he wrote me back right away and said, come out and talk to me. I had lunch with him and the provost, and after lunch they said, okay. Much to my surprise. But I was very pleased that they said, okay.
I'm surprised too. What do you think made them so eager to agree?
Well, I think Berkeley prides itself on being transparent to begin with. And I think also they felt that the financial crisis that they were in was not properly understood. And I thought, and they were working, they're people of extreme intelligence and goodwill, and they were working successfully, very hard to maintain the high standards of the university, both in terms of the students and the faculty. And I think they thought a movie might help. But obviously they were taking a chance because I had complete control over the movie. But I appreciated the fact that they were willing to take a chance with me, and they trusted me.
And were they familiar with your work?
Yeah, they'd seen some of them. I mean, they hadn't seen all the movies, but they'd seen a few of them. I mean, they'd seen Titicut Follies, for example, and that was not an obstacle to their giving me permission.
That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Did you know when you were approaching the subject that the middle class and the economic crisis would be so prevalent?
No, no, I didn't. I mean, I all that I really knew in advance was that I thought a university might make a good subject. And as I talked to them when that first visit, I learned more about the economic crisis. But basically, the idea was to hang out at a university and collect material and figure it out in the editing. I mean, the process that I had in mind was the same one that I had followed in the other movies.
One thing that I immediately jumped to with it being a university is what classes are you going to be in? How are they going to be ordered in the film? Like the subjects that are being discussed in the actual classrooms. And it seems like a lot of them are kind of pedagogical, like they're talking about education or they're talking about the institution. There's like some science, but it's
well, they're not pedagogical. I don't know what you mean exactly, because in each, well, they're actual classes. So one class they're talking about Thoreau, another class they're talking about John Donne, and another class they're talking about astrophysics, and another class they're talking about philosophy of time. So
there was one where they were talking about leadership positions.
Oh, and another talking about leadership. Yeah, well, obviously, when I come to structure the film, when I come to select the sequences I want to use, there has to be a reason why I want to use them. I had 250 hours of material. So, and the film was only a mere 4 hours, so I used 1/60th of the material.
What drew you to the Thoreau particularly?
Well, I like to make the film, but I don't like to explain it.
Oh, I see. It was interesting as someone who studied English, the Thoreau and the John Donne, especially seeing the reactions of people learning about John Donne at a young. What year were they in at that point? Would they have been
I don't know.
First or second? Yeah.
I don't know. I think they could have been. My guess is that they were all second to fourth year, because but I don't. The answer is I don't know.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing to consider how much of the audience would have gone to a university that's comparable, and how much of that is taking them back to those experiences where either they were looking around and seeing people kind of nodding off, or they were nodding off, and then you see the people that are really invested in it.
Well, that's always the case.
Yeah. But it brings up an interesting point, which is that when you're shooting in a classroom, the spectator, what they're seeing, kind of puts them in a position where they're being taught as well. Like they're getting some of the lecture.
Well, yeah, sure, sure.
It's an interesting wrinkle. Like you always do things like that where you have someone talking at the camera and you're learning about them a bit, but you actually feel like you're in the seat, like next to that other student with this one, in a way that I'm not sure in high school I felt the same way, but maybe it's something about the university that the dialogue and the lecture are so similar. That was an intriguing thing for me. I was wondering if you had considered like the seat and like the place of the spectator when you're in the classroom shooting.
Well, I mean, you basically have to.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way you can shoot it. I mean, because you want the students, you want to see the students' response to the professor. So you have to shoot it from the side or the front, because you want to see their faces, you want to see the back of their head, and you want to cut it together so that you see the students reacting or appearing to react to what the professor is talking about at that particular moment, even though some cutaways are shot either before or after the particular words of the teacher.
And in this film in particular, you have a lot of kind of roundtable discussions, literally sometimes roundtable and other times more informal. What are the challenges in just physically shooting that, being able to play off who's in the frame and not talking, who is?
Well, you have to make up your mind extremely quickly in those situations how you're going to shoot it. You want to be in a position where, or at least you want to be in a primary position where you're going to be able to get the teacher on the assumption that the teacher is going to be leading the talk. So, for example, in the Thoreau seminar, you start off with the camera at the side or at the back, which gives you both a wide shot and a good position to get the teacher. But since the students are facing the teacher, it's not a terribly good position for the students, because you get either profiles or the back of their head. So that you want to start off maybe with a wide shot, but then you change position. You want to get, so you sometimes change position, so you get a profile, or you get the student full face looking in the camera, looking not in the camera, but appearing to look at the teacher, and you're shooting them looking at the teacher.
And did you just have the one camera in the informal kind of conversations?
Only one camera. So the whole film is shot with one camera.
Yeah, and it's an achievement that like those scenes feel so, like you don't feel the editing, you feel like you're actually in.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good, but because they're all highly edited.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But you do get a sense that you're witnessing an actual conversation without any pieces missing necessarily. You're getting the lively debate. And one thing I really appreciated was how you can maybe capture one person talking and the person sitting next to them, how they just like physically behave when someone's talking beside them in these open discourses. Was that something that you knew Berkeley was like a good institution for? These
well, I mean, I don't think of it in terms of Berkeley being a good institution for it. It's something you want to look for in that kind of situation. You know, and I've had experience working in classrooms before, both in high school and in high school too, and some teaching situations in the other films. But I mean, those small classes or small meetings, like the cabinet meetings of the chancellor, they're hard to shoot, because when there are a bunch of people around the table, you don't always know who's going to talk next, and sometimes you're out of position, and you have to move, because I always try to follow whoever is speaking and pick up the cutaways when the talk is less interesting. But at the same time, you need a certain number of wide shots where you see the speaker. So, and you have to move extremely quickly, and you know, every time you change the camera position, you take a risk.
And were you kind of anticipating some of the banality that would happen in the actual bureaucratic meetings?
Well, I mean, banality happens in any meeting.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, it's a question of, for instance, the chancellor's meetings went on for an hour and the cabinet meetings went on for an hour and a half, so you had to be prepared to shoot for an hour and a half. In those situations, I like to cover the whole meeting, so that I have the choice in the editing room, since I have no idea who's going to speak next or what the subject is going to be. If you don't shoot the whole meeting, you may miss something that ultimately turns out to be very good. And when the meeting takes place, I have no idea in advance what they're going to say. And even after the meeting, I have no idea what part of it I'm going to use, because it depends on what else I'm going to use in the film and how the themes fit together.
Apart from the themes, it also seems like you want to have that dynamic of kind of getting the banality in, so like the viewer is aware that that's what's like.
Well, I mean, I mean, it's not that I'm not interested in banality, but I mean, it's hard to respond to that without knowing what specifically you're referring to.
I feel like it does a great job of capturing every academic meeting I've had to be in, which is like there are parts where everyone's kind of just like, this is stretching on a bit, but then there's like that dynamic moment where it switches. So you're editing it, but I think what's great is that you're able to get a little piece of that to kind of convey the reality of what it's like to be there.
Yeah, you try to convey what it's like to be there, but on the other hand, my obligation is to be fair to the people, and at the same time I have to cut the sequence to make it work as a sequence. You have to create the illusion that it took place the way you're seeing it, even though it didn't. So that, for example, those cabinet meetings, their actual duration might have been 90 minutes. You might see 7 minutes of it in the film, but I have to edit it so that it appears as if it took place the way you're seeing it, even though it didn't.
Yeah, it's great, because you could, I'm sure, just choose only the relevant, interesting moments. And it's nice to have...
Well, no, but different people would have different ideas as to what constitutes the relevant, interesting moments.
That's a great point. Similarly, how did you cover so much ground for the protest? Like, it seems like you're in a
run.
So you're running back to the chancellor's office, to the library,
Right. Yeah, initially running ahead of the marches, and then going back and forth between the chancellor's office and the library. Fortunately, the library is only about 100 yards, 150 yards away, but still, I mean, it was a question of deciding when to go. So I was lucky, and that I, by chance made the right decision. So I was in the chancellor's office, and in the library. At times, it worked out well for the film, I thought.
Did you have any anticipation that a place like Berkeley, you were going to maybe get a protest at some point?
Yeah, I mean, a place like Berkeley, you don't. It's quite normal to anticipate you get a protest. I didn't know what the nature of the protest would be.
I liked I felt like there was a theme of generations in the film, talking about previous generations at Berkeley, people talking about the concept of millennials. I think that comes up in a few of the discussions, that buzzword now. And also especially the use of our town, which is something that is so rooted in a specific time but keeps coming and talks about a time capsule. Is this a film that you had an idea that would happen, that there would be this consideration, or were you even considering it?
No, I mean, the film really is a response to the experience of shooting the film and studying the material.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no idea in advance, for example, there was going to be a rehearsal of a production of Our Town. I mean, I basically stumbled across it. But that's true of almost all the sequences. You come across them, and then it's a question of identifying them to yourself and figuring out a way of using them.
And as a fan of your work, a viewer that's aware of your work especially, there's another interesting kind of rhythm, which is how it rhymes back to high school or high school 2, especially discussing the Vietnam War. And I found that intriguing that you would have, I would not have expected the veterans portion to be a part of the university. And of course it draws to mind the end of high school and the protests that existed in Vietnam versus now. There's a kind of, it documents history, but then it's also history within your own films.
Right, well, yeah, I mean, that's also an example of the fact that the films are more novelistic in their structure than they are journalistic.
Yeah. So when you're cutting, you have ideas of like chapters within the...
Well, I wasn't referring so much to chapters as to the absence of didacticism and to the effort to build a dramatic narrative structure out of randomly accumulated unstaged events.
Mm. So does that mean that there's also the possibility of charting your own interests through these, like the recurrences throughout your filmography?
Well, I mean, I mean, it sort of amuses me to have echoes of the previous films.
Yeah, because I feel that.
But it's also thematic, in my view, at least thematically relevant.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was also curious about your perspective on the science that you were covering, because I felt like those scenes in particular were powerful. All of the classrooms where they were dealing with scientific, and I don't even have a personal interest in science, but it seems like those were the classes that seemed to be at once dealing with the present and the future in a way that maybe the English ones were more invested in the past. Was that something that you picked up?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also the nature of the subject matter.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I deliberately left in the for example, this discussion of dark holes, even though it's a bit difficult to understand. But I mean, most people don't understand it. I mean, other than the fact that you're an astrophysicist. But the fact is, I mean, the guy that led that seminar won the Nobel Prize the following year.
Oh, wow. For
his work on dark holes, and you know, and the science and the physics department is very famous at Berkeley, so it would have been it was important for the film to suggest that they had people of that caliber, and in addition, it served other thematic purposes.
Is it fair to say that that was a more of an advanced class in science versus the one, I think the penultimate sequence where they're talking about what's going to happen in the future?
Space trip.
Yeah. That seems like that's more of like an introductory class where, or is that, am I mistaken?
Oh yes, it was a more introductory.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a class in astronomy.
Yeah.
And it was a more general, more introductory class, whereas the class where you talked about dark holes was for graduate students.
And there's an interesting pairing with the more not more practical, but the disability sciences, the physics in the use there, which seems like it's getting more and more difficult, more and more abstract, and it culminates with someone's like, well, we don't really know like what's going to be happening. And I thought that was interesting, like that kind of admission from a professor, like almost a jokey admission that like, oh, I don't know what's going to be happening. And
well, it's an honest answer.
Yeah, especially for young students that are trusting you as a instructor to like know the answers to what's happening. It struck me as like a capsule of what can happen in a school like Berkeley, where it seems like there's a little bit more informal qualities, or at least you can make a joke about something like that without feeling like, is that a reflection of the public versus the
Well, I mean, I think it's hard to jump to that kind of generalization. I avoid that kind of generalization.
So, but then to make it more broader, then what about the public institution drew you in here?
Just to state the obvious, in a democratic society, it's very important that education be available to people from all different economic classes. And Berkeley is not only a great American university, but it's a great worldwide university. And the fact that it's public, the fact that it, you know, more than a third of its students are on scholarship of one form or another, the fact that it encourages the applications from lower income students and find ways of admitting them and supporting them once they're admitted is very important. I mean, not simply ideologically, but important for the country, because the country needs highly qualified people, not only for public institutions, but for all different kinds of work. And Berkeley has been always committed to not only a diverse student population, but to a diverse student population who are held to the highest standards of academic excellence by superb faculty.
Were you aware of the degree to which Berkeley supports the
Before I started, no.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, in a vague kind of way, but not in the way that I became subsequently aware.
I was personally surprised by that, and I think that it's really interesting the way in which you can have the activists and the kind of administrators, you can show them both aiming for the same thing, but neither of them really knowing that the other is doing it in the same way, well, especially the students. It seems like they're unaware of the extent with which the administrators are making
I mean,
this attempt.
the students were, it seemed to me too, that they were unaware of the dedication and of the administration to preserving scholarships and preserving the university and the reputation and the standards of the university, and for the students to make one of their principal demands free tuition at a point when the university is struggling to stay economically viable. It's a bit unrealistic.
And it seems like it's also kind of rooted in a middle class perspective that you chart in this, as it's kind of, that's the sensitive area. Like that's what's losing the kind of support or the stability it once had, is not those lower income bracket or a higher income bracket, but the middle. And I feel that may be the thing that everyone's taking away from this film in a way, critically already. And I'm curious how many people that participate in something like Occupy or this, the protests in this film are self-aware that that's their place, where they're coming from, and that's what's being threatened. And when you were editing this, did that become the theme that you recognized?
I mean, that's certainly, it's not the theme, but it's certainly one of the themes.
And it's interesting that I've maybe read like 4 or 5 reviews of this, and that's the thing that everyone seems to be picking
really,
out.
It's interesting. I only read 1 or 2 reviews.
Yeah. I do appreciate how it can facilitate all of these different theses, I guess you could say, but to find that people are gravitating towards one, is that something that you're accustomed to at this point? Like
No. I mean, the answer is I don't know. I can't respond to that.
How did you, when you're editing it, approach the subject of race as it came up? Because I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I mean, at the risk of your feeling that I'm facetious, I did it the way you see it in the film.
Yeah. No, what I meant was that it seems like that's something that cues something larger beyond the institution, kind of like the middle class question, that it's like gesturing towards a
lot of things that happen at Berkeley suggest things that happen outside of Berkeley. I mean, there's the whole, micro-macro thing. The kind of racism that those students were discussing is not unique to Berkeley, because they're discussing not major slights, but I mean, I hate to use the word major and minor because it may be unfair, because if you hurt someone's feelings, you hurt their feelings. But they're not life-threatening things, but they're things that they're kind of what they call mini racism, which affect the quality of experience, everyday experience. So, I mean, when they discuss, for example, the difficulty of black students to participate in study groups with white students, I mean, there can be racist explanations of that, or there could be non-racist explanations of that. But it's something that black students are extremely, with reason, sensitive to, because they feel excluded.
And it seems like it comes from an infrastructure that is greater, but we're seeing an example of it here.
Well, I mean, I don't know what you mean by infrastructure, because it doesn't necessarily come from the university, which is the infrastructure in which is the institution in which they're living and are participating as students. But I think race, I don't think it's necessarily institutionalized racism. It's more generalized racism that exists. I mean, people have. It's a reflection of attitudes toward the capacity of black students. And what you're seeing in the sequence is the consequence of that attitude in a specific situation.
So the general being the macro at that point, and the institution, the micro, we're seeing.
Yeah, well, I mean, racism hasn't disappeared.
Yeah, absolutely,
It's a brilliant generalization, but
I appreciated the cueing of the images of construction, but they're not really, as you say, didactically explained. So what is the reality of the construction that's going on? Is that just building new buildings? Is it indicative of money that's being spent on? There's a lot of talk about money being spent for tuition, but not necessarily the actual physical reality of needing to create new buildings or update them.
Well, I mean, it serves a variety of purposes. Those sequences. I mean, it's partially what you say, and partially, there's always construction going on in a university. So it's a question of what's being constructed. It's also a question of who's doing the work.
Oh, you mean like who's being contracted to do it? Or
well, who are the people who are the workers?
Yeah. Because those exterior shots that you use to kind of separate each.
Well, I mean, that's, but from the structure of the film point of view, those kind of sequences serve a variety of purposes.
Yeah.
They serve the purpose of transitions, to go from one place to another on the campus, to provide quiet moments between dramatic sequences, or action moments after long talk sequences. But they also tell you something about the kinds of buildings that are being constructed and the people who are building them.
And you also get maybe a look at the student life outside of the classroom in those, which I appreciate. Yeah. It seems like the exterior shots are.
Well, I mean, there are other kind of series of cutaways.
Yeah.
I mean, because again, like everything else in the film, whether it succeeds or not, it's not for me to say.
Yeah.
But there are always multiple purposes.
And the motif of dancing was especially, I think, enjoyable. Would that be a student group that was?
I mean, people dancing on in the square there. Yeah. I mean, most of them are students. Yeah.
Yeah. It does serve to recalibrate you in a way as a viewer, I find. But it's also I'm aware that I don't know I don't know the space from these shots. So it's a good balance of acclimatizing you to the space, but then also making you realize I don't know what building this is or if it has anything to do with another building. It does a great job of making you feel a part of the community while knowing you.
Well, almost not quite every shot, every sequence, but almost, I would say I'm trying to think when I went off campus. The only sequence that's genuinely off campus is the one with the paraplegic learning to walk with the structural apparatus. And that involved a professor and some graduate students, but the building was off campus because it was the graduate students were working there and working on their thesis, but it was a company that was formed to develop the research ideas of the man who's the professor in the scene, whom you see in the scene. But I think that's the only time in the movie that I left the camp. Well, there are a couple of nighttime shots of police cars driving around Berkeley, and then there's the short sequence on Telegraph Avenue on a Sunday. But those are the only times I left the campus.
What led you to the paraplegic research or the development?
Well, I thought it was an interesting sequence, and again, like so many other things, it illustrates a variety of points. It's a sequence in applied science, mechanical engineering. It shows a professor using an actual experience to teach. It shows graduate students running a research project, and it suggests the nature, in that young man's case, it was a motorcycle injury, but it could easily have been an IUD.
And there's also a relationship with the commercial sector as well.
And there's also a relationship with the commercial sector.
Which is interesting because that's one point that is maybe the most, where the subject talking is the most clear about how this relates to the micro-macro structure, which is what is the value of like they're literally breaking down the value of a university degree, how much you should invest in it, whether it's going to pay off, which...
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, right. And it's a question of, for instance, there are efforts now in many state universities to apply a cost-benefit analysis to the courses, so that if there are only 6 people in a course, why offer the course? If you don't need to offer the course, you don't need a teacher. If the teacher has 2 courses with only 7 people in them, you know, maybe cost-benefit analysis leads you to cancel a contract if you can get out of it. But there's also a political agenda connected with that, because the courses that generally suffer most under that kind of analysis are the courses in humanities. And so if you cut out the study of history and philosophy and political science, you're dumbing down the population so that there's less, you're creating a population of technocrats and not people who have been trained, who know anything about history, have been trained to think about social issues.
And the flip side to
that's not happening at Berkeley, but it's,
yeah.
And they're fighting against it at Berkeley, but I mean the fight at the University of Virginia, for example, where the president was forced to resign and then rehired, was precisely around that issue.
And there's the flip side being that if you're taking a course that does have that more practical application, that you have to then pay more for it because you're almost paying for a guarantee that you're going to get employment. So
right.
As a student to that, you could potentially say that you are suffering because you have to pay what a humanities student would not have to pay.
Well, I mean, there was the whole issue at Berkeley, you know, which comes up in that class toward the beginning of the film, where they charge more for the graduate schools, where the people have a greater opportunity on graduation to get high-paying jobs. And, you know, there are a lot of issues around that. But Berkeley is not one of the universities that is applying the cost-benefit analysis to the maintenance of teaching certain subjects.
It's interesting that you placed that scene discussing the graduate program so early in the film, because as a viewer, when you're watching all the classroom sequences following that, you're aware of this. You're aware of, like, is this a class that's going to result in a degree that pays off, or is it not?
Right.
You kind of, as a viewer, inhabit a bureaucratic role yourself, and not just as like a surrogate student when you're in those classrooms. And I was intrigued by that.
Well, the conversation in that class between the teacher and the students with each other frames a lot of the issues that come up later in the film.
Are you looking to cue the viewer to be able to pick those up, or is it, obviously you could put that scene at the end and make everyone think back to what they had previously seen? Do you think that that's a more effective structure to employ?
Well, I guess so, because that's the way I did it.
Yeah. What is are you working on an institution one following this? What are you currently working on?
I'm working on a movie about an art museum.
And how is it approaching completion, or?
Well, I'm about a third of the way through the editing.
How can you tell while you're shooting when you realize that you've attained enough material for this particular project?
Like everything else, it's a subjective judgment.
Yeah.
It might be that if I've been away from home too long.
Have you ever thought that maybe you had thought you had enough, and when you could have or should have maybe stayed a little longer?
Well, a couple of times I've gone back after I edited a while for the movies that became the movies about the school for the deaf and blind in Talladega. I went down there originally with the idea of making one movie about the whole place, but after I was there for a couple of days, I realized there were such big differences between the school for the deaf and the school for the blind, and the school for the multi-handicapped and the adult workshop, that I really should make 4 films. So it was hard to keep 4 films in mind. So I went back, I shot for a while, 6 or 7 weeks, went back, edited, and then went back for about 10 days to fill in the gaps that I found in the editing. And for the Law and Order film, after I edited for a while, I realized that I didn't have enough material in the station house, so I went back for a while.
Now with that Berkeley, have you been in contact with them following its completion? Have you received any feedback from them?
Yeah, they like the film.
Oh, they really like it?
Yeah, they like it. In fact, tonight there's a reception for Berkeley alumni in the Toronto area, and I'm going to show excerpts of the film to them, and the Chancellor's wife is coming, and some other people from Berkeley. No, they're very pleased with the film.
And they feel that...
And the Chancellor used to be the president of the University of Toronto.
Do they feel that it, like, are they happy with how it presents the particular issue that they're...
Yeah, no, they're very pleased with it. I'm going to show the film in Berkeley at some point, and you know, I'll probably have more discussions with them after I show it there.
And with the activists, hopefully. With the activists as well, hopefully.
Well, yeah, I mean, anybody, I mean, it's going to just be open, a couple
Yeah.
open screenings at Berkeley at some point.
Well, I'd expect an open screening at Berkeley.
Hmm?
I'd expect it to be an open
Yeah,
screening.
no, I mean,
there.
open in the sense that it will be for the students,
Yeah,
in fact,
yeah,
anybody wants to see it.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.